morning, Dan and Amy. Dr. John Torres surveying pediatricians for NBC News, as reported on MSNBC as well, to their chagrin. The survey pediatrician survey question: would you send your kids back to school?
Would you let your kids go back to school?
I will. My kids are looking forward to it.
Yes. Period. Absolutely.
Absolutely. As much as I can.
Without a hesitation.
Without a hesitation, yes.
I have no concerns about sending my child to school in the fall.
I would let my kids go back to school.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-oh, that's not what we thought they were going to say.
So we'll look forward to Dr. John Torres being fired from NBC News and those pediatricians having their medical licenses revoked. This is consistent with another clip you cannot play enough. This exchange from a couple of weeks ago between Senator Rand Paul and our infectious disease experts that we know and love, Dr. Tony Fauci,
with the gargling glass,
on reopening of schools.
Dr. Fauci, every day, virtually every day, we seem to hear from you things we can't do. But when you're asked, can we go back to school? I don't hear much certitude at all. I hear, well, maybe it depends. All of this body of evidence about schools around the world shows there's no surge. All of the evidence shows that it's rare. I mean, we've so politicized this and made it politically correct that the WHO releases that it's rare, and you have a scientist up there honestly giving her opinion. What happens to her? She's blackballed, and her report that she refers to is taken off the website. When you go to that scientist's speech and you try to click on the link, the WHO has now screened it from us because it said something that's not politically correct. That, guess what? It's rare for kids to transmit this. But I hear nothing of that coming from you. All I hear, Dr. Fauci, is we can't do this, we can't do that, we can't play baseball. Well, even that's not based on the science. I mean, flu season peaks in February. We don't know that COVID's going to be like the flu season. It might, but we don't know that. But we wouldn't ban school in October. You might close some schools when they get the flu. We need to not be so presumptuous that we know everything. But my question to you is, can't you give us a little bit more on schools that we can get back to school, that there's a great deal of evidence and it's actually good evidence that kids aren't transmitting this. It's rare, and that kids are staying healthy, and that, yes, we can open our schools.
Mr. Chairman, do I have a little bit of time to?
Well, I give you a little. That was well over 5 minutes, but we'll.
Thank you, Senator
Go ahead and
Paul.
please answer the question.
Yeah, so very quickly, Senator Paul, I agree with a lot of what you say about, this idea about people having to put their opinions out without data. And sometimes you have to make extrapolations because you're in a position where you need to at least give some sort of recommendation. But if you were listening, and I think you were, to my opening statement and my response to one of the questions, I feel very strongly we need to do whatever we can to get the children back to school. So I think we are in lock agreement with that.
All right. It's a political answer that Tony Fauci is good at giving, but nonetheless, we're in lock agreement on getting the kids back to school. And I take back to school to mean back physically in school. There just is no case for keeping the schools closed based on real world data from 24 Western nations. No case. And it's not a close call. And yet
it's happening in L.A., Atlanta, San Diego,
and
Park River Forest.
And what does that mean? It's one thing, we focus almost exclusively on K-12 education in the government school system. What about in the private school system? That's important too, perhaps more important in many respects. And we're going to have a conversation with Darla Romfo about that. She's the president and chief operating officer of the Children's Scholarship Fund. This is founded about 2 decades ago by John Walton. Yes, that Walton, the son of Sam Walton, and Ted Fortsman, a New York investment banker, both of who have passed on now. Provides partial scholarships for low-income children in grades K through 8 to go to the school that best meets their needs. Like at the collegiate system where the money is attached to you and you get to apply it to any school you want, public or private. Darla Romfo, thanks so much for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased to be here.
So give us a handle on how private schools are doing based on so many of the private schools that you work with through the parents and the families that you help support in terms of the kids' education. I know that you've written about this recently in the Hill.
So there's two answers to that. One is that in terms of online learning and pivoting to a new way of educating, they did very, very well. Our parents, in fact, are not give their schools like 95% of them give them a 4 or a 5 in terms of how well the schools did in educating. Unfortunately, private schools rely on tuition and fundraising for their economic survival, and everything has been hit very dramatically by the COVID virus. Our parents, about 80% of them, have lost income, either evenly split between half of them losing a job or having their hours cut. And 2/3 of these schools that have been so effective in actually educating children are very worried about their financial viability in the fall.
So you have,
even though they've done their,
you sort of have a combination of things, right? As we know, you're talking about scholarship families. So these are lower income families. We know that the majority of the unemployment over the last couple of months, people making less than $40,000. So on the one hand, you have families with less ability to contribute to round out the tuition requirement that the scholarship helps support. And on the other hand, you have particular schools, including Catholic schools, for example, which are, again, partially funded by what Catholic churches take in, what dioceses take in. That's down too for the churches. So now you got a real sort of budget crunch, don't you?
Yeah, you have a huge budget crunch. And as there's a tracker that the Cato Institute is actually doing, and it already shows that over 100 schools have indicated that they're going to close as a result of this pandemic. And 90 of those are Catholic schools. So that's a huge loss to inner city kids that are relying on those schools to get a good education.
But what about, I know that there's a lot of parents that are looking at private schools for the first time ever because the public schools are not going to have in-person learning, and that we hope with smaller class sizes that, private schools will be able to have in-person learning, and then they can get the education that they so desperately need.
Well, just like they were very innovative and turned on a dime in terms of offering the online learning, I can also attest to the fact that they're being innovative and creative and ahead of the curve in terms of figuring out how to reopen the schools in the fall. And I'm confident that most of them will, if they're allowed to, in the states that they're in, that they will reopen for live learning, and that they will have plans that work to effectively, if they have to do some blended learning and have to close down intermittently, have a plan B. I'm confident that they can do that. And I think parents know that too, and that's why they are interested. And that's like an upside. But again, all of these families they've been affected dramatically in terms of their income and by the disease as well.
And on that attendance issue during the time of distance learning, it's very interesting. Reuters analysis last month found fewer than half of 57 public school districts they looked at were even taking attendance. About a third were not providing required services to special needs students. By contrast, you were reported recently in a panel discussion at the Manhattan Institute on the topic that the schools you looked at were reporting 90 to 100% attendance. And what's the differential? Parental involvement, I presume.
It's parental involvement, but it's also the caring and the connection that the school has. These are people that went the extra mile. If somebody didn't show up in a class, they called them. They had a lot of personal contact. And, we are founded on the premise that parents are the first educators of their children. And that's the first, but they've chosen these schools because in carrying out that responsibility of educating their children, they realize that these schools can do the best job for their child. So it's a combination of the parental involvement and trusting the school, and the school caring about the whole person, body, mind, and soul, and going that extra mile, taking that extra initiative and step to make sure these kids are engaged.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's the parents and the school being aligned, right? One is reinforcing the other.
Exactly, which is so important. And I'm never going to diminish the fact that parents have a lot to do with what happens in a kid's education. But I also think these schools help engage the parents and they don't cut them out of the process. They bring them into the process, and I think all of our education system would benefit so much from that if we could engage the parents and bring them into it and make them. We never talk about our scholarships even as a handout. It's a hand up. We talk about, the parents are the ones that are making the biggest sacrifice, because our parents pay part of the tuition as well. So we're helping them do what they think is best for their child, and they may need a little more help this year.
And with respect to the private schools too, I mean, particularly now you're talking about states and big cities like L.A., San Diego, Atlanta, where they're mandating online education. Private schools, do they just comply, or do you see perhaps some putting up a fight because they want their kids in the seat and there's no reason they shouldn't be in their seats?
I would say private schools will try to put up a fight. I think that they really, like I said, there's some parents. I always think parents should be in charge of their kids' education. So, I mean, I'm for homeschooling too, but obviously there are a lot of families for which homeschooling does not work, and the best situation for them is to be live in person in a seat at a school. And I'm confident that our private schools that we work with will do everything they can to make that happen in person this fall.
You mentioned the word nimble before, and I want to go back to that because when I think of the Chicago public school system, for example, the word sclerotic comes to mind, not nimble. Describe from the schools that you work with, that you survey, that you talk to, how they've been nimble in trying to adjust in real time to the demands both of families, the families they serve and the students they serve, as well as the mandates that are being imposed upon them from government.
Well, they very quickly figured out how to get the technology in place so that they could have instruction that was in real time in many cases, and get the technology into the hands of the families so that they could participate in real time with classes and learning. It wasn't just sending home paper packets. It was trying to connect with kids in real time every day, and having teachers who were calling kids and being in touch with families. I mean, it was a heroic effort, and it did take a week or two to transition into it. But, nobody's going to say that it worked perfectly or that it's as good as what they could have done in person. But I think it's a pretty great thing to have 90% of your family say that they were happy with how the online instruction went. I mean, it's possible to do this. These schools do what they do on a fraction of the cost. And this is not an indictment of public schools, because I know they have all kinds of regulations and all kinds of things. And I know there's many good-hearted and well-meaning teachers that are in public schools, and some public schools do great. It's more about, let's figure out what's best for the kids in all situations and respond to that instead of what's best for the adults or what's best for the system. And I think private schools, because they have less regulation and are closer to the actual situation, can just respond more quickly.
I mean, you mentioned how many schools have already announced they're closing, 100 schools, 90 of those are Catholic. I mean, are we at the point right now where it's a clarion call to donors, those people that have resources, to intercede if you want to preserve private education in this country, if you want to preserve particular sectarian education in this country? You need to step up and provide more resources to Children's Scholarship Fund, to the tax credit scholarship program in Illinois, to school choice programs around the country. The Supreme Court struck another blow in favor of school choice recently. So there's opportunity here, but in crisis, it's going to require people that have the means to do more than perhaps they've previously done. Is that where we're at?
Yeah, it's all of those things. It's addressed the immediate needs of families and schools that are trying to struggle to send their kids to the private school, for the private school to stay afloat. It's if there's any further additional aid, which you may or may not agree with the idea of more aid, but if there's going to be more aid for education, an equitable portion of it should go to the private schools, because they educate 10% of the kids. If you believe that these institutions are important for America, important for our culture, important for our society, yeah, now is the moment to step up, because there may not be, I once heard it said that there'll be school choice when the last Catholic school closes its door. That's not what we want to happen. Espinoza is a great case. It doesn't remove all the political impediments in states that are run by people opposed. It's not going to change progressive minds about the importance of having school choice. But in the states that have it, it's time to expand it. And, philanthropists should invest in doing that. In states that have smaller school choice programs that don't have a large enough dollar amount following the child or a large enough overall amount in the program to attract new providers, because this is an opportunity to attract innovative people who want to start new schools. And there's 5 states right now that have big enough school choice programs where you can actually go start a program and have to not rely on philanthropy ongoing. So to invest in all of those things, again, from the most immediate needs up the hierarchy, yes, it's the time to do that. Because there's even though there's a dark cloud, Espinoza is a bright light shining through that cloud.
Espinoza, of course, the Supreme Court case that we were both referencing. Darla Romfo, she's the president and chief operating officer of the Children's Scholarship Fund, nonprofit that provides partial scholarships for low-income children in grades K through 8 to go to schools that best meet their needs. Darla, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too.
Yep. And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.